Son, failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. Those were the exact words my father, Harold Thompson, told me when I was 32 years old and had just lost everything I had built in my life. It was a cold December morning in Chicago, Illinois, and I was sitting on the edge of his hospital bed with empty hands and a broken heart. What he didn't know was that those 9 words would become the foundation upon which I would rebuild not only my life, but also my soul. My name is Michael David Thompson. I'm 47 years old, and for the past 15 years I've been the CEO of a construction company that employs over 200 American families. But before getting here, before becoming who I am today, I had to go through the most painful and transformative experience of my existence. An experience that took me from the depths of failure to the heights of success, guided only by the wisdom of a 78-year-old man who seemed to have lost everything, but who actually had everything. Before I continue with this story that changed my destiny, I want to ask you something from the heart. If these words are touching something inside you, if you recognize something of your own experience in my story, don't leave without letting me know you were here. Hit that like button on this video, not because it's an obligation, but so I'll know we share something real, something genuine, and if you feel this story might help someone else, someone who might be going through their own difficult moment, share it. Sometimes the right words reach the right person at exactly the right time. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories of real people who have gone through tough times and come out stronger. Have you ever had the feeling that everything you touch crumbles? Have you experienced that anguish of waking up every morning knowing the day will be a battle against yourself? I lived that for 6 months of my life, from June to December of 2009. 6 months that felt like 6 years, where each day was a lesson in humility I hadn't asked to receive, but that life decided to give me anyway. To understand how I got to that point, I need to take you 5 years back, to 2004, when I was a 27-year-old architect full of dreams and ambitions. I had studied at Northwestern University in Evanston, where I graduated with honors and the absolute certainty that the world was waiting for my revolutionary ideas. My father, Harold, had worked his whole life as a construction worker, building houses for other people, always hoping that someday his son would do something bigger, something that would bring the Thompson name to a place of respect in our community. I had a girlfriend, Sarah Mitchell, an elementary school teacher with whom I planned to marry as soon as my business took off. We had plans, dreams, long conversations in Lincoln Park about the house we would build together, the children we would have, the perfect life that was within our reach. Sarah believed in me more than I believed in myself, always telling me I had something special, that I was going to go far. Her faith in me was so solid that sometimes I was afraid of not living up to her expectations. In 2005, I decided to take the big step. With the savings I had accumulated working at an architecture firm for 2 years, plus a loan I got backed by my father with his small house in the Lincoln Square neighborhood, I opened my own construction company. I called it Thompson Construction and Associates, although I actually had no associates. The name made me feel more important, more established than I really was. The first 2 years were promising. I got some small contracts, home renovations, construction of commercial spaces, nothing spectacular but enough to keep me afloat and start building a reputation. My father was proud, always bragging to his buddies that his son Michael was an architect, that he had his own company. Sarah and I finally got married in June of 2006 at St. Alphonsus Church, with a modest but love-filled reception at the Palmer House downtown. But early success made me believe I was more skilled than I really was. In 2007, when the economy was booming and everyone was talking about the boom in the construction sector, I decided to expand aggressively. I accepted projects bigger than I could handle, hired more staff than I could pay, and most dangerously of all, I started making financial commitments based on optimistic projections that never materialized. The first blow came in early 2008. An important client, a supermarket chain for which I was building 3 locations simultaneously, declared bankruptcy without warning. They owed me $250,000, money I had already reinvested in materials and salaries. I had to use my personal reserves to cover immediate expenses, thinking it was a temporary setback, something I could overcome with the next contract. But problems started multiplying like an infection. Suppliers began demanding cash payments. Workers became restless about delays in their salaries, and what had been a thriving business became a constant source of stress and worry. Sarah tried to encourage me, telling me that all entrepreneurs went through difficult times, that the important thing was not to give up. But I could see how her eyes filled with concern every time the phone rang and it was another creditor demanding payments. Have you ever felt like you're running uphill with a huge stone on your back? That was my daily reality. Every morning, I woke up hoping that day would bring the call that would change everything, the contract that would get me out of the hole. But instead of solutions, more problems came. Unpaid bills, legal threats, workers quitting, suppliers cutting credit. The breaking point came in May of 2009. I had bet everything on a construction project for a small shopping center in Schaumburg. It was my golden opportunity, the contract that would not only get me out of the crisis but establish me as a serious builder in the Chicago metropolitan area. I worked day and night for months, invested every last dollar I could borrow, mortgaged my house, pawned my wife's jewelry, asked for money from family and friends. When the project was 80% complete, the main investors disappeared. Literally disappeared. One day they were there supervising the work, talking about future plans, and the next their offices were empty and their phones disconnected. Later I found out it was an elaborate scam, that they had done the same thing in other cities, but for me that was just academic information. The practical reality was that I had run out of money, without a contract, and with debts exceeding $1 million. The fall was brutal and quick. Within weeks I lost my company, my house, my car, and what hurt more than all the material things, the trust of people who had believed in me. Sarah, my sweet Sarah, tried to stay strong, but the pressure was too much. Nightly arguments about money became the norm, uncomfortable silences during meals, lies about supposed opportunities that never came. In August of 2009, after 3 months of living at my in-laws' house because we had nowhere else to go, Sarah asked me for some time. She didn't blame me directly, was never cruel to me, but her words were like knives. Michael, I need to think if this is the future I want for myself, if this life of constant uncertainty is what I signed up for when I married you. I love you, but I also love myself, and I need to know if you're going to get out of this or if you're going to stay here feeling sorry for yourself. That night, alone in the room my in-laws had lent me, I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child, not just for the loss of money or material goods, but for realizing I had lost something much more valuable, faith in myself. I had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who blamed circumstances, the government, the economic crisis, everything except myself for the decisions I had made. The following months were the darkest of my life. Without work, without money, without wife, without my own house, I spent my time sending resumes that no one answered, knocking on doors that no one opened, asking for opportunities that no one gave me. The city that once seemed full of possibilities now felt hostile, as if everyone knew about my failure and judged me for it. Chicago, my beautiful Chicago, had become the stage of my humiliation. In October, I received a call that chilled my blood. My father had suffered a heart attack while working on a construction site. Harold, the man who at 78 years old was still laying bricks under the sun to help support our family financially, had collapsed at work. When I got to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the doctors told me it had been a severe heart attack, that he had managed to survive but his heart was very weak. Seeing my father in that hospital bed, connected to machines, with a lost look but still worried about me, was like receiving a slap of reality. Here was a man who had worked honestly his whole life, who had never complained about his fate, who had sacrificed his own dreams so I could study for a degree, and now he was sick while I sank into self-pity. During the following weeks, I spent many hours at the hospital, accompanying my father during his recovery. He hardly spoke, but I felt his presence as a silent reproach. Not a cruel reproach, but the presence of someone who had faced much greater difficulties than mine and had never given up. While I lamented having lost a company and a house, he had spent decades building houses for others without really having one of his own. Have you noticed how sometimes life's most important lessons come disguised as ordinary moments? One December afternoon, when I had been sunk in my existential crisis for 6 months, I was sitting next to my father's bed. He had improved considerably, but was still weak. Outside it was snowing, one of those Chicago snowfalls that seemed to wash not only the streets but also the soul. I was lost in my thoughts, probably doing what I had done for months, blaming fate for my bad luck. My father looked at me with those tired but wise eyes that men who have worked with their hands all their lives have, and told me, "Michael, come here, sit closer." His voice sounded weak but firm. I moved closer to his bed, and he took my hand with his, rough from decades of hard work. What he told me next were the words that would change not only my perspective on failure, but my complete understanding of what it means to be a man, a husband, a son, and eventually, a father. Son, he told me with that tranquility that only people who have lived long enough to understand life's important things have. Failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. I've seen many men fall in my life, but the only ones who really failed were those who decided that getting up was too difficult. You're not one of those men, Michael. I've known you since you were in your mother's womb. I've watched you grow, study, fight, and I know you have inside you what it takes to get up from where you are. He paused, took a deep breath, and continued. Look, I never had the education you have. Never knew about architecture or business, but I know something about building. And I'm going to tell you what I've learned in 50 years of laying brick upon brick. The strongest foundations aren't made when everything goes easy. They're made when you have to dig deeper because the ground is difficult. You're digging deep now, son. You're making the foundation for something better than what you had before. In that moment, sitting in that hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and hope, something changed inside me. It wasn't a sudden and dramatic change like in the movies, but something more subtle yet deeper. It was as if I had been seeing my situation through a fogged glass, and suddenly someone had cleaned it. My father's words didn't change my external circumstances. I was still jobless, moneyless, homeless, but they changed something fundamental inside me. They changed my relationship with failure. I realized that for 6 months I had been treating my fall as if it were a death sentence, as if the universe had decided I didn't deserve success. But my father's words made me understand that what had happened to me wasn't the end of my story. It was simply a difficult chapter. Failure wasn't my identity. It was my experience. And like all experience, it could teach me something if I was willing to learn. That night, I couldn't sleep, but for the first time in months, it wasn't because of anxiety, but because of excitement. I started seeing my situation from a completely different perspective. Instead of asking myself why this had happened to me, I started asking myself what I could learn from this. Instead of lamenting what I had lost, I started taking inventory of what I still had: my education, my experience, my health, and now, thanks to my father, a deeper understanding of what perseverance really meant. If you're listening to me now, and you find yourself in a difficult moment in your life, I want you to know you're not alone. We've all been on the ground at some point. We've all felt like the world is crashing down on us. But I want you to remember my father's words. Failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. No matter how many times you've fallen, no matter how deep you feel you are, you can always, always get up. And if this story is giving you even a little bit of hope, share it with someone who might need it. Let me know in the comments where you're watching this from, what your city is, your country, your story. I love knowing these words reach real people in real places, facing real challenges. With this new perspective, I started taking concrete actions. First, I stopped sending resumes hoping someone would save me and started offering my services as an independent consultant. I began offering free project reviews for small merchants in Chicago's markets. My idea was simple: demonstrate my value before asking money for it. The response was surprising. The merchants, who normally distrusted architects for considering them expensive and pretentious, appreciated that someone with my preparation treated them with respect and offered help without asking for anything in return. Don Ricardo Gonzalez, owner of a hardware store in Little Village, was the first to offer me paid work. He needed to remodel his store and expand it to the adjacent space. It was a small project. The budget was modest, but I approached it as if it were the most important project of my career. I worked personally on every detail, from design to supervising the installation of the last screw. Don Ricardo was so satisfied that he recommended me to other merchants, and little by little, I started building a new clientele based not on grandiose promises, but on concrete results and honest treatment. Meanwhile, my relationship with my father had transformed. His words had not only changed my perspective on failure, but had opened a new form of communication between us. For the first time in my adult life, I started seeing Harold not just as my father, but as a mentor, someone whose practical wisdom perfectly complemented my formal education. During the following months, as my father recovered from his heart attack, we spent many afternoons talking about life, work, construction, dreams. He told me stories from his youth, about mistakes he had made, about lessons he had learned. I told him about my current projects, my future plans, about things I was discovering about myself. One afternoon, while we were reviewing the plans for a house I was designing for a young family in Pilsen, my father made an observation that stayed engraved in my memory. "Mike," he told me, "before you built to impress people, Now you build to serve them. That's the difference between an architect and a real builder. He was right. Before, when I had my big company, I was more concerned about profit margins and making projects that look spectacular in my portfolio. Now, working with working families and small merchants, I had learned to really listen to my clients' needs, to design spaces that would improve their daily life, not just look pretty. By March of 2010, my situation had improved considerably. I wasn't rich or had a big company, but I had steady work, stable income, and most importantly, a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. I had learned to live with fewer expenses but more satisfaction, to value small but well-done projects, to build relationships based on trust and mutual respect. It was then that Sarah called me. 8 months had passed since our separation. 8 months during which I had respected her space but had never stopped loving her. She asked me to meet to talk. We met in the same Lincoln Park where we had spent so many happy hours during our courtship, where we had made plans for a future that seemed guaranteed. Michael, she told me with that honesty that had always characterized our relationship, I've been observing the changes in your life these past months. I don't just mean that you have work again, but something deeper. Before you were ambitious but insecure, always trying to prove something. Now I see you calmer, more sure of yourself, but in a different way, like you had found something you didn't have before. She was right. Failure had taken many things from me, but it had also given me something invaluable. The certainty that I could survive difficulties, the understanding that my worth as a person didn't depend on my professional success, and the wisdom that the strongest foundations are built during the most difficult moments. Sarah and I decided to try again, but this time with a different foundation. Not with the naivety of believing love was enough to solve all problems, but with the maturity to understand that true love is demonstrated precisely during difficult moments. We reconciled in April, and in June we renewed our marriage vows in a small but meaningful ceremony, with my father as the main witness. The following years were of constant but measured growth. Instead of expanding aggressively like I had done before, I grew organically, project by project, satisfied client by satisfied client. I established Thompson Construction again, but this time with a completely different philosophy. Quality over quantity, relationships over transactions, client satisfaction over profit margins. In 2012, our first child was born, Harold, named in honor of my father. Seeing Harold holding his grandson, seeing the emotion in his eyes when he told him stories or taught him to identify different types of wood, filled me with a joy I couldn't have experienced if I hadn't gone through the experience of failure. Now I understood that true wealth wasn't in the size of my company, but in the quality of my relationships. By 2015, I already had a solid company with 20 employees, all of them people I trusted and who trusted me. It wasn't the biggest company in Chicago, but it was known for its quality, honesty, and fair treatment of both clients and workers. I had built exactly what my father had predicted, strong foundations by digging deep in difficult ground. My father, now 84 years old, had been my unofficial advisor during all these years. Although he no longer worked physically on construction sites, his practical wisdom continued to be invaluable to my company. The workers respected him enormously, and more than once his observations had prevented costly mistakes or improved the quality of our projects. Do you know what was the moment when I really understood the transformative power of my father's words? It was in December of 2016, exactly 7 years after that afternoon in the hospital. I was supervising the construction of a housing complex for working families, the biggest project I had handled since my professional rebirth. It was a beautiful project, houses designed with love for families who, like mine, had struggled to get ahead. That afternoon, a young architect recently graduated, Robert Martinez, came to the construction site looking for work. Something in his look reminded me of myself 15 years earlier, ambitious, talented, but with that unconscious arrogance that comes from not having faced life's real difficulties yet. I gave him work as a project assistant, and during the first months, he proved to be very capable but also impatient, always suggesting ways to do things faster, cheaper, more efficient. One day, he made a calculation error that almost resulted in a serious structural problem. When he realized his mistake, he came to my office completely demoralized, convinced I was going to fire him. He was sitting in front of my desk with the same expression of defeat I must have had so many times during my crisis. In that moment, I heard my own voice telling him exactly the same words my father had told me years earlier. Robert, failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. This mistake is teaching you something important about responsibility and humility. The question isn't whether you're going to make mistakes. We all make them. The question is what you're going to learn from them and how you're going to use that learning to be better. Seeing the transformation in his expression, seeing how his shoulders straightened and his look recovered determination, made me realize that my father's words hadn't been just for me. They were a legacy, a wisdom that now I had the responsibility to transmit to others who were going through their own difficult moments. Robert became one of my best collaborators, and eventually a junior partner in the company. But more important than that, he became someone who also understood that true success isn't measured only in numbers, but in the positive impact you can have on other people's lives. In 2018, my father began showing signs of cognitive deterioration. The doctor said it was the beginning of senile dementia, that it was normal at his age, but that it would progress slowly. During the next 2 years, while his memory gradually faded, I dedicated myself to spending as much time as possible with him, not just as a son, but as a disciple, trying to absorb every last drop of his wisdom before it was lost forever. They were beautiful and painful conversations at the same time. There were days when he didn't remember my name, but he remembered perfectly the correct technique for mixing cement. There were afternoons when he confused me with his brother who had died 20 years ago, but he gave me advice about life that was as accurate as always. It was as if his essence, his fundamental wisdom, was deeper than his conscious memory. In January of 2020, my father had another heart attack, this one much more severe than the previous one. This time the doctors were clear. His heart was too weak. There wasn't much more to do medically. He could live days, weeks, maybe months, but his body was slowly shutting down. The last days I spent with him in the hospital were the most precious and painful of my life. Despite his mental confusion, there were moments of crystal clarity when he seemed to understand perfectly what was happening. In one of those moments, he took my hand with what little strength he had left and told me, "Michael, do you remember what I told you that time about failure?" "Yes, Dad," I answered him. "Failure isn't falling down. It's staying down." He smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and told me, "Exactly, son. And you never stayed down. I'm very proud of the man you became. Now it's your turn to teach others to get up." My father died 3 days later, on a quiet February morning, surrounded by his family. At his funeral, besides family and friends, many of my workers, clients, and other people whose lives he had touched in some way came. Robert gave a beautiful speech about how Harold's words, transmitted through me, had changed his perspective on failure and success. But the moment that impacted me most was when an elderly lady approached me after the service. It was Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, for whom I had built a small but beautiful house in Pilsen 3 years earlier. She told me, "Young Michael, your father must be very proud of you. I know your story, I know you went through very difficult times, but look what you built afterward. You didn't just build me a house, you gave me back hope that there are still honest people in this world." Today, in 2024, Thompson Construction employs 210 people and has built over 1,000 homes for working families in Illinois. But more important than the numbers is the legacy we're building. A legacy of integrity, quality, and respect for the people who trust us to build their homes. Sarah and I now have 3 children. Harold, who is 12 years old, Sarah, who is 9, and Harold Jr., who is 6, all of them raised with the values my father taught me. Every night, when I tuck them in, I tell them stories about their grandfather, about the importance of honest work, about how to face difficulties with dignity, and I always end by telling them the words that will change their lives if they ever need them. Failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. My oldest son, Harold, already shows interest in construction. On weekends, he accompanies me to the construction sites, asks intelligent questions, observes how the workers work with the same respect I learned to have for his grandfather. Recently, he told me something that filled me with emotion. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to build houses like you. But I also want to help people who fall to get up again. Do you know what's the most beautiful thing about all this? That my father's words didn't stay just in our family. Through the years, I've shared that wisdom with dozens of employees, clients, and young professionals who have gone through difficult times. Robert, who is now my partner, uses them with his own team. Several of my workers have told me they've applied that philosophy in their own lives, teaching it to their children and grandchildren. 6 months ago, we implemented a program in the company that we call Second Chances. It's a program where we give work to people who have had professional failures, who have made mistakes, who have fallen but want to get up. It's not charity, it's recognizing that people who have gone through difficulties and learned from them often become the most committed and loyal employees. Maria Elena Gutierrez was the first person we hired through this program. She had been an accountant at a company that went bankrupt due to bad decisions by its owners, and although she had no fault at all, she had been unemployed for 2 years because employers assumed there was something wrong with her. When I interviewed her and she told me her story, I saw in her eyes the same pain I had felt during my crisis. I told her exactly what my father had told me. Maria Elena, failure isn't falling down. It's staying down. You're not going to stay down. Today you become our new financial administrator, and together we're going to build something beautiful. Maria Elena has been an extraordinary addition to our team. Her experience with failure made her more careful, more diligent, more committed to doing things right. But more than that, she became a natural mentor for other employees facing personal or professional difficulties. Last month, during our monthly staff meeting, Maria Elena asked for the floor and said something that moved me to tears. I want to thank Engineer Michael for teaching me that my past doesn't define my future. A year ago, I thought my career had ended at 45 years old. Today, I'm responsible for the finances of a prosperous company, and more importantly, I've regained confidence in myself. If anyone here is going through a difficult time, remember, failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. These are the things my father couldn't see physically, but I'm sure he sees them from wherever he is now. His wisdom continues to multiply, touching lives he never knew, inspiring people who were born after his death. That's what a true legacy means. Words that transcend generations, that become living principles that guide people long after the one who spoke them is no longer here. Every year, on the anniversary of my father's death, I organize what I call Second Chances Day at the company. We invite entrepreneurs who have failed and want to try again, young professionals who have made mistakes and are looking for a new opportunity, people who simply need to hear that their story hasn't ended. It's not an event of pity or self-pity, it's a celebration of the human capacity to get up, learn, and grow. This year's event was particularly special. A 25-year-old young man named Diego Morales came who had lost his fast food business due to the pandemic. He was sunk in depression, convinced he was a failure, that he had disappointed his family, that he would never succeed at anything again. When his turn came to speak, he could barely articulate coherent words. He apologized several times, said maybe it had been a mistake to come, that he wasn't like the other people who had managed to get ahead. In that moment, I felt like I was seeing my 15-year-old self, that broken man who sat next to his father's bed not knowing how to move forward. I got up from my seat and approached him. I put my hand on his shoulder and told him, with all the conviction my father had put in his words years earlier, Diego, failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. You came here today, that means you haven't stayed down. It means there's something inside you that still believes you can get up. And you're right, yes you can. It wasn't magic, it wasn't an instant change, but I saw something in his eyes light up, that small flame of hope we all carry inside but that sometimes circumstances try to extinguish. I offered him work at our company as a project assistant, not out of pity, but because I recognized in him the same determination that had gotten me ahead. Diego accepted the job, and during the past 8 months has been one of our most dedicated employees. But more importantly, he has regained confidence in himself. Last week, he told me he's saving money to open another business, this time with the experience and humility his previous failure gave him. He asked me for permission to put a plaque on the wall of his future business that says, "Failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. Harold Thompson." If you're listening to this story from somewhere in the world, from any city, any country, any circumstance, I want you to know that no matter how deep you feel you've fallen, you can always get up. It doesn't matter if your failure was financial, personal, professional, or any other type. It doesn't matter if people tell you you're too old to start over, or that you already had your chance and wasted it. My father's words weren't just for me, they're for you too. They're for anyone who's on the ground and needs to remember that the ground isn't their permanent place. You're much stronger than you think, you have more resources than you imagine, and your story hasn't ended yet. Let me know in the comments where you're listening to this from. Tell me your city, your country, your moment. If you're going through something difficult, don't keep it to yourself. Sharing our struggles makes them smaller, and sharing our victories makes them bigger. This community we've created here is a place where real people tell real stories to help other real people. And if my story has given you even a little bit of hope, share it. Maybe there's someone in your life who needs to hear these words today. Maybe there's someone who's on the ground and needs to be reminded they can get up. Don't underestimate the power of a story shared at the right time. Before I finish, I want to tell you about the most important project I'm currently working on. It's called the Herald Foundation, and its goal is to help small entrepreneurs who have failed to get back up. It's not just giving money, it's offering mentorship, training, emotional support, and the opportunity to be part of a community of people who understand what it means to fall and get up. The foundation operates under a very simple principle. No one is too fallen to get up. No one is too old to start over. No one has made too many mistakes to deserve a second chance. So far, we've helped 53 people rebuild their professional lives, and each of them now helps others who are going through the same thing. This is the true power of my father's words. They didn't stay in that hospital room in Chicago. They became a life philosophy that now impacts hundreds of people throughout America, and through stories like this, we hope they reach thousands more around the world. My son Harold, who is now 12 years old, often asks me about his grandfather, about the stories I tell him, about why those words were so important. Recently, he asked me a question that made me reflect deeply. Dad, do you think Grandpa knew his words were going to change so many lives? I answered him what I sincerely believe. I don't think your grandfather knew specifically all the lives his words were going to touch. But I do think he knew the power that the right words have when said at the right time with true love. Your grandfather understood that wisdom is useless if it's not shared, that experience only has value if it's used to help others. And that's the final lesson I want to share with you today. The words that have helped you, the lessons you've learned from your own falls and rises, aren't just for you. They're seeds you should plant in other hearts that are ready to grow. Maybe you're not an entrepreneur like me. Maybe you don't have a foundation or a company. But we all have the opportunity to be the voice someone else needs to hear. When you see someone who has fallen, don't judge them. Remember that you've also been on the ground sometime. When you meet someone who's struggling to get up, share your own story of resilience. When you find a person who believes their life is over, remind them that while there's life, there's possibility to start over. Today, 15 years after that afternoon that changed my life, every time I face a difficulty, every time something doesn't go as expected, every time I feel circumstances are bigger than me, I hear my father's voice. It's not a ghostly or mystical voice. It's the voice of wisdom that lives inside me, that has become part of who I am. Failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. These 9 words have become the unofficial motto of my company, the guiding principle of my foundation, the philosophy I teach my children, and the conviction I share with anyone willing to listen. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. No matter where you are now, no matter how difficult your situation is, no matter how many times you've tried and failed, you can still get up. Your story hasn't ended. Your best chapter might be about to be written. And when you finally get up, when you manage to get ahead, remember to help others do the same. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of people who believe in second chances, third chances, and all the chances that are necessary. If this story touched your heart, let me know down here. Tell me your own story of resilience. Share the words that have helped you get up, and together let's keep building a community where no one stays on the ground alone. Always remember, failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. And you're not someone who stays down. You're someone who gets up, learns, grows, and helps others do the same. Until the next story, and remember that every day is a new opportunity to build something beautiful with your life.